My name is Gauteng, Editor-in-Chief of News 24, and I am still at The Rock, the National Nerve Centre, where the election results are displayed on this big board behind us. I'm joined this morning on the hot couch, the hot seat, by Davy Scholes, election analyst who has had some sleep, I believe.
I feel great.
Welcome, Davy.
Thank you, Adrian.
And by Sheldon Marias, Assistant Editor for News 24. Sheldon, did you get some sleep?
Not as much as Derby. But I'm here, excited, and the numbers are coming in.
When we walked in here this morning, we've had 3/4 of the votes counted. So this big billboard behind us on the floor of The Rock now displays the results of 76% of your votes having been counted, declared, and are up for display. The result as it currently stands, 12 million votes in. Sheldon, can you just run us through the top 3-4 parties at the moment and what they've got?
Yeah, so looking at the national picture, we've got the ANC is obviously still leading. They've got 57.28% of the vote. How many votes is that? Well, that's 6.9 million votes. They're trailed by the DA. They're coming in on 2,625,617 votes.
So they've reached that magical 2 million number.
That's it, but it still leaves them at 21.75%, which is lower than their 2014 performance. You've then got the EFF with 1.2 million votes, and they're coming in at 10.10% of the vote. The IFP and the FF Plus have swapped positions.
So we've got a new number 4.
That's it. We've got a new number 4. The IFP, they've got just over 353,000 votes. That gives them 2.93%. The FF Plus, they've kind of slowed down since yesterday, but they're still just under 300,000 votes with 2.46% share of the votes cast or counted so far.
There's a lot of F words in this on this ballot. We're going to have to be careful. Davy Scholes, these results where we're currently standing with 3/4 of the votes in are very close to your final projection. So you projected the ANC would end on 57, the DA would end on 21 point something, and the EFF would end just below or just over 10%. This is where we're currently at. So what you are telling us is with 6 million, just under 6 million votes still outstanding, let's call it 5 million votes, things will remain the same.
Yes, roughly. So we actually, 75% of the voting stations have reported, but actually only 68% or so of the vote has reported, because there are some big stations still left to come. And the latest projection, this is the piece of paper I'm using to draw
piece of paper. Good.
Is at 57.3 for the ANC, 20.9 now for the DA, so they're down to 20.9. The EFF at 10.4, the IFP at 3.5, and the Freedom Front Plus at 2.7%. So I think we're kind of getting close to that level now, and it makes complete sense to me if I look at what is not in yet. What is not in is actually a very close approximation of what the whole country looks like, because there's a lot of suburban vote out. So for example, there's particularly in the northern suburbs in Cape Town, some of the southern suburbs in Cape Town, sections of Mitchell's Plain. If I look at Gauteng, there's a lot of the northern suburbs in Joburg not out, so places like Linden, Parktown not in yet. But then also a large chunk from Soweto not in. And I think Tshwane has the same. So Shanguve is not yet properly in, but Centurion is also not yet in. And then if I look at Ekurhuleni, there's I think sections of Boksburg, Benoni not yet in, and also sections of kind of Katlehong, Vosloorus not in. And then KZN, the same story in eThekwini, plus a huge swath of kind of northern KZN that's not in yet. If you add all of that together, it kind of looks a little bit like the national number. So everything we have now, it's kind of the same as everything that we still have to come.
It's a little South Africa that's still going to be counted.
Exactly.
And that is exactly your model, right? That people in South Africa, although we live in different places, and people do vote the same when they kind of live in the same type of location.
Exactly. Yeah.
Davy, let's just have a look at these national numbers. Any things that jump out? Anything that when you left here yesterday to go catch some well-deserved sleep, I must say, because you have been really superb in crunching the numbers for the whole of South Africa and News 24. I see even the former or almost former Premier of the Western Cape said yesterday that you were the best analyst, and I do agree with on this one. But Davy, when you left yesterday, some of the numbers were on the board. You've come back this morning, pretty much the same. Any movements that kind of surprised you or that you think parties lagging behind? You've mentioned the DA may even go under 21.
Yeah, no major movements. I think any movements now, as I've said, are like marginal movements, couple of like decimals here or there, but we kind of seem to be on track, and the trend seems to be holding for what we were projecting earlier. And I think what we had discussed earlier still holds. I think the turnout situation is exactly as we've expected. Really low turnout. The national model is still projecting 65, and actually the decimals are now below 65, with potential to go to like 64 point something, which is really extraordinary. So a very low turnout election that's holding, and as we discussed previous as well, is the kind of turnout permutation is holding. So really a relatively high suburban turnout in the high 70s, maybe even hitting 80 in some places, and super low township turnout. So it differs from province by province, but kind of anywhere from the high 50s to the low to mid 60s. So we're talking about a big differential between minority voters in the suburbs turning out heavily, and black voters in the townships not turning out so heavily. And I think that's really dragged down the ANC number a lot in this election.
So this pattern's going to hold. Pattern's going to hold. And if there's any party faithful for the small parties who were still hoping that you were going to make it, I've got bad news for you. It's not likely to happen. It's not likely to happen. The BLF, the Purple Cows, even some of the other parties, new entrants. We've had Mr. Claudi Motswaneng. I'm sorry, sir, you're not going to go to Parliament. I have to break the news to you. Sheldon Marias, last night I saw one of the most interesting articles for me last night was Fikile Mbalula, the ANC's head of elections and former Minister of Sport, who was quoted saying that had Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma won at the Nasrec election end of 2017, the ANC would have gone to 40% in this election. Now this I find very ironic coming from him who campaigned for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, but as we know, a day is a lifetime in politics, so I guess 12 months is a century. But what did you make of that statement? I mean, and just a general vibe around that.
I think it points to the reliance of Cyril or the ANC's reliance on Cyril Ramaphosa, because anecdotally we saw pictures coming out on voting day. We know in the run-up to elections there was a lot made of the so-called white vote, and giving the vote to Cyril Ramaphosa because he was seen as someone who was friendly to white voters as such. So I think that lends itself to that type of analysis, because a lot of what has saved the ANC is because Cyril Ramaphosa is there, and I think despite them having him, we've seen the numbers being dragged down since 2014.
Yes.
But I think it's a clear indication, and the ANC's I suppose suggestion that, listen, we are relying on Cyril Ramaphosa to get us through this election, to get us over that 50% mark. What it will mean for the unity question in the ANC, I don't know. If I was NDZ, I don't know how I would feel right now as a senior leader within the ANC. And you've got this, you've got Fikile Mbalula saying, "Oh, if I was at the helm, we'd be below 40%." But I think it's the ANC's acknowledgement that the 9 years, whether they were lost years or whatever, the wasted years.
It's now apparently 4 wasted years.
Well, yes, it went from 9 to 4, but it really did have an impact on the ANC, and I think you can see that in the numbers, across all of the provinces where they've taken a hit.
We will shortly look at maps of the provincial voting and where the provinces have gone in terms of the parties. I just want to tell you a small anecdote before we go there. Yes. Last night when I left the centre, that does start increasingly to feel like a casino from the inside. It does have that Monte Casino feeling with the lights. You're not entirely sure if it's day or night. But I went to our hotel and went for a quick drink where I bumped into some ANC comrades from Gauteng, and they were celebrating. They were very happy. As we had predicted yesterday, they would take the 57% and run.
Yeah, absolutely.
David Scholes, can you just talk us through the provinces?
Can I raise one? I just want to raise one thing before we get there. Is this topic that you just raised about the ANC doing better with white voters and that there being some sort of Ramaphosa effect in places like the Western Cape and Gauteng? Because that's something that I'm really fascinated by, and I think we can put this question finally to bed.
Okay.
I mean, we have 52% of the suburbs reporting in Gauteng right now. In those suburbs, the ANC won 11.7% of the vote in 2014. They're actually down to 11% this year. So I can think now with about 95% certainty say that the ANC did not win more white votes in this election. And I think there will be an interesting conversation about all the time that was spent and the campaign resources and the focus and whether that was worth it or not. It always seemed like a bit of a strange plan to me. Anyway, okay, I just wanted to say that.
No, very interesting topic,
Yeah.
because we did hear Cyril Ramaphosa for the first time in many years, an ANC leader campaigning on non-racialism, which Jacob Zuma didn't do. And that clearly hasn't yet paid off for the ANC. But Davi, let's just quickly look at the provinces. So we've got a map on the screen at the moment showing our viewers the province, the country covered in green mostly.
Yes.
But let's start with the blue province. Why is it blue?
It's blue because we've projected the DA to win that province. So
Western Cape.
Yeah, so the Western Cape, yes. In the Western Cape, we projected, I think yesterday morning, that the DA would win about 55% of the vote. They're coming in at that level, and the ANC at roughly 29%. So it looks like, or definitely will be, that the DA will hold the Western Cape, but with a reduced majority. So they had 59% of the vote in 2014, and on the provincial ballot, they're down to 55, holding. And then there are two other provinces that are interesting, that are not as dark as the others, which is the Northern Cape, which the viewers will see is a light green. That's because we've projected that the ANC will win the Northern Cape, but with a majority that's less than 60%. So that the provinces that are light green are kind of ANC coming in under 60.
Under 60, yes,
Exactly,
yes.
and in the Northern Cape they're down from 64 to 57, so they've taken a bit of a knock but still holding it. And then the other province that we can now call and project is, for the first time now, as KwaZulu-Natal, KZN. We can project that the ANC will win KZN, but with a very significantly reduced majority. So the ANC won 64% of the vote in KZN in 2014. We're projecting that they're going to come in at 54, so actually 53.8 at this stage, which is a very significantly reduced majority, which is why it's a light green on the map. And then the viewers will also see Gauteng currently has no colour. That's because we can't call it at this stage. It's
Too close to call.
Too close to call. So look, it's obvious that the ANC will be the largest party in Gauteng, but it's just too close to call whether they're going to reach 50 or not. And I mean, currently the model is projecting 50.3% for the ANC, and that's with 51% of the vote reporting.
Wow.
So it's 50.3, really, really tight. The DA projection is 27.6 right now in Gauteng, the EFF 14.1, and then, as with the rest of the northern provinces, the Freedom Front Plus doing well, coming in at 3.9% of the vote, the IFP 0.8. So it's tight, it's really, really tight, and it could go either way. I mean, my gut feel is leaning towards the ANC getting to 50% plus one, more likely, because we are at 50.3, but this thing could still end up at 49.5. That's still a distinct possibility.
Adrian, I just want to come in there
Yes,
and give you what the numbers currently show, and I suppose lends credence to Davi's modelling. So you mentioned 53.8 in KwaZulu-Natal. So currently with 64% of voting districts, not the votes, voting districts counted, the ANC is currently sitting on 53.08. So I suppose that speaks to the accuracy of the modelling. In Gauteng, where you've got 55.94%, and as you said, it's too early to call, but the ANC is sitting on 50.52%. Again, speaking to the accuracy of the model and how close Gauteng is going to be as well. And even in KZN, I mean, there's going to be a victory for the ANC, as you mentioned, but it's not going to be a significant, or at least a 60% margin.
So let's talk about Gauteng for a moment, and thank you for those maps, Davi. And of course, if the whole country was covered in your color coding, it would be a light green for the ANC, because we are saying they're coming in on 57%.
Right, yes, exactly. 57.3 at this stage.
Davi gets very irritated when I don't mention the point.
Yeah.
57.3.
Exactly, accuracy important.
57.3 light green for South Africa. Gauteng too close to call. Now, what does this mean, Sheldon Moraes? It means that if the ANC comes in under 50%, they're going to have to look for a coalition partner.
The C word.
So I walked the floor last night, and I was trying to extract some intelligence from the floor to see if I can pick up any hint of a love affair or a call or something, someone reaching out to someone else at that level. The politicians are holding poker face. They are not letting slip anything. But of course, the ANC would be the party to make the move in Gauteng. They will be the biggest. They're not going to come in on 40, Darby. They're going to come in on 49 point something if they go below 50.
Yeah.
So they're literally probably going to need one seat,
Yeah.
I guess, one person to vote with them. Easiest would be to partner with the IFP.
Yeah, you've got the IFP who at this stage are just 0.82%. They could also, have the likes of the ACDP, ATM, currently sixth on the on the Gauteng list. Will they work with the ANC, considering how the ATM was formed and some of the people who are there? I think the IFP may be the easiest. Let's not forget that an FF Plus leader once served in Jacob Zuma's cabinet.
Absolutely correct. His name was Peter Mulder.
His name was Peter
and
Mulder.
He was the deputy
well, his name
minister.
is Peter Mulder. I don't think
His
he's
name is
changed.
still Peter Mulder.
Yeah,
he's
he
just no
hasn't
longer the
changed that
leader
name.
of the Freedom Front Plus.
That's it.
But he was here yesterday to party with the rest. But he was the deputy minister of agriculture.
Agriculture, yeah. So look, in politics, and a lot of the parties have been saying, look, they haven't identified one specific partner. In the run-up to the elections, they said, look, we'll be open. Let's see the results that come out, kind of hedging their bets, leaving it open as well. Could we even see, it would obviously push it well over the 50% mark, but could we see the ANC and the EFF? There's been a lot of talk about whether they would form, whether they would form a government. We know that after the municipal elections, it was off the table. Soon after the results came out. But the ANC, wouldn't need much, even if they were dragged below that 50% mark. And there are a number of options in who they could partner with.
Darby Schools, Cyril Ramaphosa has been credited a lot as being a masterful strategist. Okay. What would be going on in his mind at the moment if he listens to us right now, as I'm sure he's doing, and thinking about Gauteng, if the ANC comes in under 50%? Because he's not going to want to award someone, he's not going to want to be nice, he's going to want to annihilate his coalition partner. Who would you want to rather annihilate, the EFF or the DA?
So annihilate, I think, is the wrong word. I think the perfect outcome for the ANC in the long term is to have EFF people voting ANC. I think that is the long-term strategic objective for any ANC leader at this stage, because that is what's driven relative ANC weakness over the last 5 years. And I'm not sure how you think about the coalition in that context, but I'm sure that any thoughts about coalition strategy and its electoral implications in a place like Gauteng are going to be based around winning back EFF votes. And you'd probably have to do focus grouping and polling on this to figure it out properly, but my sense is that the decision to either work with the EFF or not work with the EFF in that situation has an important bearing on that. So maybe working with the EFF actually helps the ANC to win back EFF votes over time, or maybe alienating them and kind of pushing them out of the mainstream by working with someone else helps the ANC to win back EFF votes. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but I'm sure that the strategic thinking about this is being framed from that perspective, as how to win back EFF supporters back to the ANC.
Before we talk about a possible DA coalition, let's look at the ANC at the Gauteng results as we have them at the moment, and what you will see in a moment is the result from the 2014 election, and then the results as they currently stand for Gauteng. So that is going to come up on your screen in a moment, Darby. The DA. Let's talk about a possible DA ANC coalition. Is that even part of the landscape, of the thinking, of the talk?
I just don't think so. Theoretically it's possible, right? 49 plus 27 is a big number. So yeah, it's possible, but I just don't see it happening. I think the DA's long-term objective is to remove the ANC from governance in Gauteng and governance in South Africa, and further entrenching ANC governance in Gauteng for longer, just to me, doesn't align with that strategic logic. So I suspect the DA will do everything it possibly can to form a non-ANC involved coalition in Gauteng. So if the ANC somehow comes in at 49, I think you'll find James Self on the phone to whoever is appropriate.
Julius Malema.
Yeah, well, to Julius Malema and to Pieter Groenewald
Prince
Buthelezi to put together, and maybe even whoever the appropriate person at the ACDP is, to put together a kind of everyone other than the ANC coalition that maybe scrapes it.
And we've seen how wonderfully that's worked out for the DA in the past.
I'm sure they'll try it again.
We haven't done a lot of sarcasm on this show, but I had to do that. So if we look at the graphic at the moment, the ANC is down in Gauteng, the DA is down in Gauteng, and the EFF is grown.
Yeah.
So the EFF is the growing party.
Yes, massively.
Davy, can you at this stage tell our viewers where the EFF is growing in Gauteng? Because there's a bit of a perception out there, and I think the EFF themselves would like to, they present themselves as the party for workers and for the unemployed and for the downtrodden.
Yeah.
Is this what's coming through in the results?
So the answer is actually simple. It's everywhere, and I can literally take you by category, right? So we have in our model, we look at all of the suburban voting districts on its own, and if you look at just the suburbs in Gauteng, for example, the EFF won 2.5% of the suburban vote in 2014. They're up to 4%. Okay, so someone in the suburbs is voting more for the EFF. So it could be that some white voters are voting for them. I doubt it. It's probably middle-class black voters who live in the suburbs who are voting EFF. That's one thing.
Is this suburbs Gauteng?
Gauteng suburbs, yes.
Suburbs.
So these are Gauteng numbers, and then there's a kind of subsection of Gauteng, which is lots of like a diverse group of voters. So places like Lenasia, for example. So there are kind of very diverse voters, coloured voters, Indian voters, white voters, black voters, all living together in places. So I like to call those marginal areas. And in those areas, the EFF won about 11% of the vote last time. They're up to 15%, so they're up there as well. So I think cross-section of everyone voting a bit more EFF. But then, for me, the most interesting part is if you take all the townships in Gauteng, the entire black electorate in Gauteng, basically, and you analyze it deeply, you'll find that there are historically has been kind of two distinct parts of it electorally. The one part, which is much larger, is where the ANC is exceptionally strong, and where the EFF has made only marginal inroads in the past. Large sections of Soweto are like that. The kind of southern townships in Ekurhuleni, Vosloorus, Katlehong is like that. And there the EFF won about 11% of the vote in 2014. They're up to 17%. So that's a big growth in kind of those hardcore ANC townships. But there's a sub-pocket of the townships, which I track separately, which I think is really important to look at, where the EFF does better and where EFF inroads traditionally has been better. And this sub-pocket is often in the townships, but just a little bit closer to the cities and a little bit higher income. So it's like maybe some self-standing houses people built themselves and so on. So it's just the demographics are a little bit different from an income perspective. And there the EFF won 20% of the vote in 2014. They're up to 24% of the vote in those portions of the suburb and of the townships in Gauteng. So the bottom line is more everywhere, and actually interestingly, kind of like by the same quantum. They're almost like up by the same amount everywhere, but disproportionately up in places like Soweto and Katlehong and Vosloorus. So
very interesting.
Yeah, so that's why they're going from 10% in Gauteng in 2014 to projecting to 14.1% now.
Now this poses a very interesting challenge for the EFF, Sheldon Moraes, because the ANC has showed themselves as at this moment, I would argue, the only party that can really claim to be a broad church and pull that off. The DA has tried to emulate that model to be a broad church for everyone, and it seems, looking at this year's election, it's not a train smash. They're not dying, but the party is declining. Where does Julius Malema and the Red Berets go from here, listening to what Davy has just said, that their support comes a bit from everywhere? Do they try and please everyone, or do they focus on townships, for example, going forward?
I think, they may be inclined to stick on the same path, because if it's worked for them from 2014 up until now, they may say, well, listen, we're clearly on the right trajectory, and you may find that they'll tap into people's lived experiences in those middle class areas, people who straddle the line between currently living middle class lives, but having grown up in the type of circumstances that the that the EFF rather is appealing to. So you may find that the EFF now says, listen, we stay on the same line. Clearly we've got a hook. We will be able to get more voters in. Let's stay on the same line. Let's double down on what we've already been doing, because we know we are getting to certain people. But it may change it. What happens if they do come into power in any sort of form. Because then it does change it. Now you've got to obviously deliver, and it's not just about the rhetoric and what you hope to do in fighting the current majority party in whichever sphere they may be. But I think the EFF will probably double down. It's working for them. It's working for them across the board, and they may have some room left to grow using the same strategy.
I mean, let's say it like it is. The EFF is unashamedly about being a pro-black party and talking about black people getting back the land, getting jobs, being more empowered in terms of economics and transformation. And the ANC is not there. The ANC is still preaching on racialism, trying to be a party for all, and that might end up being the big distinguishing factor between the two parties going forward.
And I think the caveat with the EFF, in which people sometimes forget, is while yes they are pro-poor and looking to that, they're saying to their voters, once we've moved you out of poverty, it's okay to live a middle-class lifestyle. So whenever people question Julius Malema, but you live in the northern suburbs and you wear Gucci shoes,
and your wife is part of the Inanda Club.
Yes, you're part of the Inanda Club. So I think in a certain way the rhetoric is then supported by a lived experience to say it's okay. We're not saying, listen, don't live a lifestyle in which you are comfortable. Just don't do it by corruption, which they've obviously often said. Don't do it by corrupt means. Don't do it by whether we'll leave that for another.
And that's where it gets tricky for the EFF.
There's something really interesting to add to this. Like, I completely agree with everything that's been said, but there's something fascinating in the polling around the EFF. If you look at the EFF in the black electorate, there's like a certain portion of the black electorate that loves the EFF. Like 10 to 15% or so of the black electorate feels incredibly strongly animated by the EFF. But at the same time, there's also a large portion of the black electorate that is turned off by the EFF, that actually really doesn't like it and maybe doesn't really have a problem with a more kind of actively pro-black policy, but really doesn't like fights in parliament, like generally destructive behavior, slapping journalists, starting fights with Karima Brown, doing all of this kind of stuff, and also having policy that's not, costed in detail, that is not super credible, because I think there's a large portion of the black electorate that sees governance and politics as the single most important thing to advance South Africa's transformation and their access to the economy. And we think about the EFF as, okay, I kind of like what they're saying, but I can't trust these guys to actually manage the fiscus, right? And implement a detailed transformation program of the economy. So if the EFF really wants to jump from like the current 10 to 15% band that they're in, and we just said 17% in Soweto and Katlong and Potchefstroom and whatever, if they want that to be something like 50 and actually win Gauteng and govern Gauteng, they're going to have to convince a lot of people who currently just don't believe it that they actually can govern, that they're not like an unruly mob.
And we've seen that they are almost allergic to governing. They don't want to be in the Tshwane Council or in Joburg.
But my sense is that the strategic logic is, I think, starting to dawn on the EFF, is that they have to reposition themselves as a serious political party that is interested in the business of governing. They either are going to make that transition or not, and if they don't, they're going to stay where they are. If they do, then they have the potential to actually grow, and I think that's really what it comes down to.
Interesting, guys. I want us to end with KZN, so we're going to look at what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal, the Zulu Kingdom. Of course, a former president of South Africa by the name of Jacob Zuma comes from there. We know the Zuma factor hung largely over this election. Even the Sunday before the election, both major Sunday newspapers, City Press and the Sunday Times, still had Zuma in their headlines. So the Zuma factor is something, Davies, calls that may be playing on your KZN results. You've just called it, you've just projected that the ANC will win KZN, but how? What a drop.
Yeah, massive drop. And look, the model has updated while we just spoke about Gauteng. So they're at 57% of the vote has been reported in KZN, now projected for the ANC at 54.3, okay? They got 65.3 last time, so that's minus 11, right? Massive drop. The DA is coming in projecting at 14. Last time they got 13.4, so I think really disappointing, stable result for the DA.
Yes.
And the EFF growing from 2.5% last time to 9.1% in the projection. The IFP going from 10 to 17. Massive growth. So big growth for the IFP and the EFF. The IFP seems to have just cannibalized the NFP vote to a large extent, taken some of these ANC losses have gone to the IFP, particularly in the northern part of KZN. But the EFF have made massive inroads in urban KZN, like eThekwini, the large eThekwini townships, this Durban. Big numbers for the EFF. I still have to do a detailed analysis to understand exactly how big in that area, but it seems significant. And then Pietermaritzburg as well, and the kind of southern portion of KZN, the kind of portion between eThekwini and the Eastern Cape. Lots of voters down there, and the EFF also making some inroads there. And I think that's what's driving this to a large extent.
Sheldon Morais, so the history of KZN is obviously fascinating. In the first election, the IFP actually governed the province in 1994. They achieved the most votes. The ANC came in. Nelson Mandela very strategically deployed a leader like Jacob Zuma in KZN to win the province. The ANC finally achieved to do that. They've been governing for many years, and now suddenly they're almost at that place where one can predict if on the current trajectory they're going to lose power in the next election if something big doesn't change. How does the ANC now approach KZN? Because it seemingly didn't work for them that Zuma campaigned for them. It's just too removed. So Ramaphosa is preaching anti-corruption, preaching 9 wasted years, but Jacob Zuma must still campaign for the party.
Yeah, Adrian, I think it's a very interesting one. Whether Zuma actively campaigned for the party, but we know that there was also a lot of suggestion about him actively working against Cyril Ramaphosa, playing the long game towards the NGC. So could you be seeing part of that playing out in KZN, where the ANC actually, is fighting itself? I think what the ANC and KZN will have to do is firstly to deal with the politics on the ground, the local government politics. We've seen the political killings which have hampered the party in that province, and at a provincial level also sort out the provincial leadership. Because we know for a long time in the run-up to the Nasrec conference, post the Nasrec conference, there was a lot of friction. There was the Cyril Ramaphosa group, the pro-Zuma group, trying to still control power within the province as well, and then kind of a settlement agreement. Yes. And I think the ANC will have to find a clear direction. How Cyril happens to do it. Does he use the likes of Becky Cele, who is also strong in the province? Does he bring in Sihle Sikalala and then strengthen that and say, listen, work on the unity ticket? But I think the spectre of Jacob Zuma is definitely going to hang over the ANC, and not just in KZN. I think we're still seeing the sort of the momentum from the Zuma years playing out in the vote now. So even with Cyril Ramaphosa, you kind of see that as a possibility.
This is a fascinating result. This is the biggest knock the ANC is going to take in all of the provinces.
Yes.
And what's fascinating, when I sat here a few years ago, Jacob Zuma's just gotten into power. KZN was the only province where the ANC grew their support.
Yeah, exactly.
This KZN support is very, very intimately linked to our former president.
It is, and so I kind of agree with everything you guys just said about KZN, but there's one complication in that I think that KZN is now just catching up almost to the national trend. So what it feels like to me is happening is that you had this Jacob Zuma effect in KZN that pushed the ANC. Now if you take that out of the equation, what's happening in KZN is just sort of the natural KZN result almost. So where the EFF lagged behind their national numbers, they're now just sort of catching up to the urban townships in KZN.
Winds of change.
Yeah, but they're just the urban townships in KZN are now just catching up to the national trend. It now looks like urban townships everywhere else. So I think that a lot of what's driving this is just the same trends that are driving the rest of the country, which is scarring of the ANC brand because of the last 10 years, but then people actually liking Ramaphosa to some extent, and just the EFF brand, I think, slowly but surely starting to become more and more popular, like it is everywhere else in the country. But now it seems more amplified in KZN because they're just coming off a low base because of this previous Jacob Zuma kind of effect that held them down.
Dawie Schools has called it. KZN will go to the ANC, albeit with a very, very reduced majority. The DA has been one of the big talking points of this election. It looks like the party will end below what it got in 2014, and that's when you come back to this warm couch, this hot couch, the red couch, red and green couch. You will see my colleague Tidi Madia, our senior political journalist, in discussion with Solly Malatsi from the DA. First, we're going to go to the floor downstairs and look what the latest results tell us.
Hello, welcome to News 24. My name is CD Madia. We are still coming to you live from The Rock, the IEC's Results Operations Center here in Pretoria. We're bringing you the latest developments as we count down to the end, really, of the election season. We're looking at the numbers behind me from the floor on the big screen to see how political parties are faring, to see who South Africans want to see taking this country forward. It's been a mixed bag of results, I think, for a lot of parties. We've seen the smaller parties are incredibly unhappy about the outcomes and about how the election season in essence has been handled. I am currently joined on the couch, as Adrian said, the warm couch earlier. I'm joined now by the spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance, Solly Malatsi. Solly, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be back here.
It really has been a mixed bag. I've never seen an election that feels this complex, actually, not in my lifetime at least. What do you make of, let's speak about just the elections as a whole, up to where we are first.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, it's the complex nature of this election, and you see it reflected even in the results, is one that I think down the line in the history books will have to re-look at it. And even the polling that was done in the lead up to election about, what did we generally miss, both from pollsters, analysts, and even political parties. And the sense of reaction that we've been getting across the board here is a reflection of that.
When you speak now about even the numbers, right? The DA is on about 21.8%, a tiny margin from where you were previously. I see the ANC is also not doing so well. It's at 57%, 57.22%, and the EFF, which was predicted by many to grow, is at 10.9%, missing also the mark because many said it would double its numbers. It hasn't done that quite yet. But speaking about the DA, that doesn't look good. 21.82% is not the expectations, both from the party and for the most part from your supporters.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, we went into this election looking for growth. You go into every election looking for growth. So it's never a nice thing to see a decline, whether it's by, half a percentage point or a single digit. The fact is we are in this business to grow so that we can end up in government and measure our effectiveness in there. At the same time, we got to look at the context. Every election occurs within a context, and every organization's results have to be linked to the context. 2018, to be honest, CD, was a very challenging year for the Democratic Alliance. And these results, we are content with them. We could have grown, but we're also mindful of the fact that we dealt with some difficult chapters in the organization in 2018. And it is only at the beginning of this year that we regained the momentum when it fully started focusing on the campaign. You could argue that perhaps the time was too little, too late.
It was.
So we have tried to make the best out of the situation. We are hoping that we'll get closer to 22% so that it is stable rather than, a decline. And post this election, we'll have to have an introspection about what's the way forward, in terms of balancing growth in, amongst Indian, colored, black voters, but also how do we keep our traditional base galvanized so that we can maintain the momentum of growth going into the upcoming local government elections, because from now on the focus is going to be on preparations leading into the local government elections.
There are many things I want to pull apart from everything you've said, but why did the DA not listen? The pollsters were all saying the same thing over and over again. I remember myself asking Lucy, are you not concerned? You're the only ones who are polling yourself so high. Everyone else says you're not going to do well. Why did the DA fail to listen?
Well, it's not a failure to listen. It was a response to what our polling was saying, and we weren't ignoring all the polling that was coming. This is the most, by far, intense campaign in terms of groundwork activity that the DA has done. So the work was responding to the pressures that we were in. The results might not fully reflect that because, there are also other dynamics at play. There is a higher percentage of spoiled votes compared to previous years.
Yes.
That is also a factor that we need to focus more on in terms of how it has contributed to it. But there's also lower voter turnout, and we have to start engaging those factors in totality and look at our own work as to where are areas that we could have done better. I don't think we ignored everything that was at play. Every poll, you have to look at it and contrast it with the methodology that we were using and look at the variations. And even amongst the different polls, they were so far apart that it was almost difficult to have a clear grasp of what the polls were saying.
But they all pegged the DA as being on a decline. none of them actually said to us that the DA was going to grow, which is where I'm struggling with the DA. It felt like an arrogance, actually, and a stubbornness. It was a very ANC-like attitude where you say to the DA, but are you not concerned that this is happening and people are saying you're not going to grow, either you're going to stay as you are or you're going to decline? And the DA was like, no. Many in the DA said to me, no, look at our own poll. And that's where I struggled as well, and a lot of South Africans struggled, saying, why can the DA not listen? Why can the DA not heed this warning and do something to turn around the strategy? But I want to move on to the idea of introspection. What does that entail for the DA to introspect? What must happen? Do you look at the leadership? Is Musi still fit for purpose?
Absolutely. Musi is still fit for purpose. Just last year he was re-elected unopposed at Congress. And I think for now, I mean, we got to look at the fact that in 2016 he was the same guy who led this party to an unprecedented result. This is a difficult chapter that we have to look at it in totality. But from where I'm standing right now in the organization, there's absolutely no doubt that he still has the mandate to lead the organization until the next Congress.
What you're saying is in absolute contrast with what your federal executive chair is saying. James Self has been quoted in the media, in fact EWN had it as well, that he says there's no guarantee, he cannot guarantee that Musi will stay on as leader. Already kind of posing questions around what must happen with Musi Maimane. I mean, a leader who leads his party to where it is, in essence, loses the confidence of the party. It's not surprising. And so when other leaders are saying that and you are now in contrast with that, what are we meant to make sense of? What are we meant to understand from that?
Well, it's not contrast. I mean, the leader gets his term of office from Congress. Congress was last year, and the lifespan of his leadership term will end at the next Congress. And that's where the debate about, a leadership contest would emerge. I think it would be unfortunate to start having a conversation about leadership contest at this stage, because in strictly constitutional speaking of the party, the leader serves until the next Congress. The introspection is about the party where it is right now and how we handle difficult conversations in the lead up to elections.
Help me understand how the DA works. Are there no options to get rid of a leader until the next Congress? In the ANC, you always hear people talk about, let's have an NGC, let's have a special Congress when they're unhappy with the leader. Is there no room for that, where the leader or even the Federal Executive Council, FedEx, can sit down and say, actually, this leader has failed us? What are the rules as far as the DA's own constitution is concerned?
Sure. So I'll start by separating the individual from the process, because this is not a conversation about a referendum on the current leader's term. So in terms of the party's constitution, is that there is Federal Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the party, in between Congress. Beneath Federal Council is Federal Executive, which is the senior decision-making structure of the body that looks at the daily management of the organization. Federal Council, through a majority, can open a conversation about the leader, at that time. But like I said, for us now, we have to interrogate the results of the election. We've got a federal executive meeting on Monday, which will be the first federal executive meeting post the elections, where we'll also interrogate the elections and have a proper review of our performance in the election and make an announcement on what we think the focus of the party should be going forward.
Now, the DA said that it wasn't necessarily interested in a rerun of the elections, but they did say that you did say you wanted an audit. Have you had any communication from the IEC? Because this is coming to an end. What's expected to happen is that a declaration is meant to take place, but we're not sure if one should take place until the audit is completed. Will they declare and then come back to us at a later stage with the audit? Do you still stand by this is what you want? You want an audit?
Yeah, we proposed an audit during the discussions we had with the IEC. They agreed to it. I think the best thing for the IEC to do would be to have an outcome of that audit before they make any declaration. Because it will be futile for me to have the outcomes of the audit once they've made a declaration of the results. So that's what we'll be watching today and hoping that they handle this very responsibly.
What timelines for the audit discussed? I know it's a sample, it's not a full audit.
Yeah.
It's a small sample, supposedly. Have there been timelines discussed? As South Africans, we don't know actually.
Sitting here, I don't know. Even in their pronouncement yesterday, they didn't articulate a timeline. This morning, our principal representative on the PLC was in contact with Sai Mamavulo about that. We are hoping that later this morning we'll get an indication of the timeline. But I think logically, it would make sense that they have an outcome of the audit prior to the declaration, so that as political parties, we can engage that before the declaration, because once the declaration is done, I mean, there's very little scope for you to maneuver in terms of how do you proceed with the outcomes of that audit.
All right. Have you spoken to some of the smaller parties, because you are in coalitions with them, and a lot of them, as I saw yesterday, were incredibly angry, again calling for a rerun. Has there been dialogue? I'm thinking about parties like COPE. I mean, COPE is now a very reduced role going forward in the National Assembly, but has there been conversations around how they feel versus what you think they should do as a party?
Look, there is a meeting that's going to take place, if it hasn't started now, between the political leaders of the opposition parties. We are represented there by, our leadership there, so they'll have a conversation. I'm sure some of the issues with regards to the IEC will come to that fore, and I think later on I'll be able to have an outcome was what was agreed from that meeting, if there was any agreement on the issues discussed.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. That was Solima Lati, spokesperson of the DA. We'll catch up with them later. Lots of developments taking place as we sit here, waiting for the end, really, of these election season to find a declaration at some point. For now, I'm going to quickly cross to the floor, and then we'll go to Kelly for a social media update.
They had a video for News 24, and I'm joined by Kelly Anderson, our social media editor. Kelly, you have been chained to that laptop, keeping an eye on what's been happening on social media.
Yes.
Yesterday, the big surprise for me was that the Freedom Front Plus were really lighting up on socials.
Yes, you and everyone on social were very shocked. I see they have dropped down one position. But yeah, people aren't really talking about them this morning. The kind of general mood is just people pretty much criticizing voters for voting the ANC again. EFF supporters are a little bit more energized today because their results are starting to stream in and it's looking a bit better for them, and a lot of criticism for the DA as well. So yeah, there has been a bit of a lull today on social. I think people are tired. Politicians are tweeting a lot less. I think they have exhausted their social media campaigning, so it's a bit more quiet today. But we can go through a couple of things that people are saying and people are talking about. We've got one person here saying insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Voting for the ANC and expecting change is another form of insanity. I'm glad I voted EFF.
Okay.
Another one for the ANC, a more positive outlook. I personally believe ANC getting anything above 55 is a good result considering all that's been happening over the last 5 to 7 years, which I mean, I think that is pretty true. I think the ANC themselves are celebrating their result. And then we've got someone here saying, so the 100-year-old movement is celebrating the potential loss of 22 parliamentary seats while the opposition is growing.
So quite scathing of the ANC online this morning.
Yes, we've actually got an ANC voter here responding to this tweet saying, as an ANC voter, I'm glad of it, trimming the fat. We have become too cumbersome and obese. The only way our politicians will wake up is by shock. Thought it would be worse, actually.
Sure.
So yeah, I think they're also doing a bit of self-reflection, and yeah, so the ANC is getting a bit of a lashing, but the DA, on the other hand, is also getting quite a lashing. This person saying, I wonder how the DA is going to spin this one. They've reduced their mandate in the Western Cape, no Northern Cape, and possibly no Gauteng, no official opposition status in 4 provinces, and an overall decline in support. It is a bad day for the blue wave.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And then we have someone here saying, some are saying that the DA failed because it tried to be too much of a broad church. Broad church politics can work. There is evidence here and abroad. The DA's problem is that it's not even sure what religion it is punting, never mind what kind of church it is.
Right.
Yeah. And then we have someone else here criticizing the leader of the party, saying, considering what happened to our country in the last 5 years and the opportunity the DA had, the current results show one thing only. Musi Maimane is not the right guy for the job and needs to go. No excuse for doing worse than 2014 nationally.
Of course, Tsidi just spoke to Solly Malatsi,
Yes.
the DA spokesperson, who says Musi Maimane is safe. He was the elected leader, and he says that the DA remains fully confident in the leader. Social media believing something slightly different.
It looks like it, but I mean, only obviously time will tell, and the results are not completely out yet, so we can all kind of, yeah.
We're about 70%, 75%.
Yes. Moving on to the EFF, we've got a complete mixed bag here. Johan could see over here saying, seeing an extremist party like the EFF and a nationalist party like the FF Plus grow makes me fearful for the future of South Africa. South Africans choosing to be more divided than united.
I suppose it goes back to the broad church idea that really perhaps the DA and even the ANC are struggling to be all things to all people. Freedom Front Plus and the EFF are speaking to very specific types of voters, and we're certainly seeing that really work for them, this election.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting these two parties seeing growth, because I think these two parties took quite a strong stance on land, and clearly both their views on land resonated with people one way or the other. So, I mean, obviously it's quite a hot topic that we need to watch and consider, and maybe the ANC and the DA were too muted on it. Yeah. Here's someone saying, it's fantastic seeing the EFF grow. More young people now have seats in parliament. South African politics are changing. Watch this space.
In fact, yesterday when we spoke to Dalian Pofu of the EFF, he spoke about how energized the EFF was by that youth vote, and how grateful they were to the electorate who showed up in rainy, miserable conditions. He attributed that to them being young and excited about voting.
Yeah, and I think the EFF did a fantastic campaign in kind of mobilizing the youth. on social media specifically to get out and go vote. I think they made them very excited, and I think they made them feel like they were part of something big. And I think that did work for them.
If only elections were won on Twitter.
Yeah, unfortunately
we would have a President Malema.
But here's a differing opinion. This person saying the EFF, with all its shenanigans, only getting 10% nationally, 90% rejected their populism, violence, and policy extremism, which goes back to what Davi was saying earlier, that he sees that black voters, some of them resonate with this kind of thing, but some of them want a bit more of a stable a policy and a stable party. And he was saying that basically the EFF might need to kind of relook that and maybe start taking how they're going to actually govern a bit more seriously than just making noise and kind of getting attention in the media, which is an interesting view. This person saying, the one thing I'm proud of about the EFF is how they refuse to pose a risk to our democracy by perpetuating or entertaining election rigging news. We cannot afford to not have faith in the process or results. This is how disruptions and coups start. Which is a good point. I think a lot of people maybe expected the EFF to contest and say the elections were rigged and maybe make a bit of noise, because I think that's what people come to expect of them, to constantly disrupt, and they haven't, which I think is it's pretty cool to see. Let's go on. More on the EFF. David taking a few bites at Goliath.
It really has been the theme of the election, really.
Yeah, David and Goliath, the dark horse of the FF Plus. It's been very interesting. Losing 21 seats in the NA is definitely a problem. Patiently waiting to see Gauteng.
I think we all are.
Oh my goodness.
Davi is calling it. Well, his projection is showing 50.3% for the ANC.
That is
if it doesn't
tight.
happen, it might come down to the ANC making a deal with the IFP. I think we're all on a knife edge about Gauteng.
Yeah, definitely. And then someone else here saying it is becoming more clear that the real winner in this election is the EFF. I will forever refer to this party as the one which single-handedly changed the face of South African politics. Congratulations to all the fighters. And I think I kind of want to just end maybe on this comment, which was on our Facebook, which was quite a cool one. News 24 reader D. De Silva saying, fantastic results, more balance of power. This is a good thing for any democracy. The ANC is not all powerful. Good. DA did not listen when we said we were tired of hearing about the ANC and got punished. Good. EFF showed growth, not bad for a young party. Good. I'm happy with the results. Not one party was absolutely guaranteed a victory of any kind. There were surprises. Good. Viva SA Viva. Proud of all who voted. Looking forward to Parliament. Lol. Which I think is a nice little wrap of what's happening here, and quite a positive outlook. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Excellent. Kelly, we're going to be live throughout the day. How do our viewers at home get in touch with us and share their opinions?
Yes, you can follow us on Twitter at News24, follow us on Instagram at News24, and you can find us on Facebook, News24. Please send through your views, comments, anything, just chat with us. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, you can get all the latest results up on news24.com. Yeah.
Very exciting. So that hashtag is SA Elections 2019. That's it from Kelly and I. We're going to leave you in the very, very capable hands of our assistant editor Peter Du Toit and senior political reporter Tsidi Madia. They have been out and about all week practically, and they've been speaking to politicians, and we're going to do a bit of a journalistic discussion on their impression of the vote counting so far. Over to you, Tsidi.
Thank you, Jerusha. So we continue with our conversation. The one thing we haven't had this week, at least you and I, is our conversation about what we've been observing. Remember, we do this on a regular basis on our podcast Politiki, which features every week on News 24. We're bringing Politiki to the screens today.
A visual Politiki.
Visual Politiki at the Rock, at the Results Operations Center here at the IEC here in Tshwane. It's been a long journey. I've been waiting excitedly for the elections. They're finally here and I'm drained, to be honest. How are you feeling?
Morning, Tsidi. Look, I think we're all a bit dazed and confused at the moment. If you look around us, it's the same old yellow lights on our very bleak skins. You know, it feels like we're all got some or other liver condition, the way that we're looking. You know, and it's the stale air in this massive hall. You know, that everything smells the same, the food smells the same, the people are getting tired now. You know, some of the parties live and breathe and sleep here. So it's a bit of a mess at the moment, and we're trying to make sense of the results, aren't we? Trying to make sense about what happened.
And that's the issue. I've never witnessed an election so complex. You know, we knew that some things like the DA might drop. We knew that the ANC was in trouble. We heard that the EFF would grow. But I didn't think that we'd have this uproar yesterday on Thursday with the political parties, the smaller parties demonstrating, protesting within the IEC center. I never saw that happening. And also this whole confusion around how the IEC is handled. I think that's where we need to start. How the IEC has handled the elections. This is an institution that's been the most credible, has never been tainted since the dawn of democracy. You've always heard about how the IEC does its job well, minus maybe the issue in 2016 over the voters' roll. But the Concourts had allowed them, the Constitutional Court allowed them to continue. But now there are many questions about whether or not they're capable of dealing with the big numbers of millions of people trying to vote.
Tiri, that has been one of the stories of the week. It's first, let me say, and I think you'd agree, to be here is a wonderful privilege. To be here, seeing how the process works, having access to all the big shots, all the politicians, they mill around, you talk to them, they tell you stuff off the record, other stuff they tell you on the record because they want it out. So it's the place where you want to be. It's the place where we can actually figure out why it happened, and what happened. But the IEC, you're right, it has been a jewel in our crown. There has been some issues. The double voting issue, there are some parties that are unhappy about it. I know there are senior leaders in the ANC and the DA who say, look, there are places in KZN, the Eastern Cape, that we're unhappy about. Let's hope that the integrity of the institution does not come under fire, that the results will be certified by Saturday, as has been the tradition for 25 years.
I'm wondering how that's going to happen, because I was speaking to Solly Balati for the DA. Remember, they've asked for an audit, and the IEC has agreed to doing an audit, a sample audit, not a full audit, because then I don't know when we'll get the results, to see whether or not the claims of double voting took place, the issues about the indelible ink, whether those issues are legitimate or not. So I'm wondering, what is the purpose of declaring the elections on a Saturday when we don't know what the audit results are?
Well, we're going to have to wait. Our officers look out on the legal centre over there, where all the lawyers, all the legal people from the IEC sit. They're sitting with all the statutes governing the IEC, governing elections, so they know exactly what's going on. One thing that we're not certain about is the extent.
That's the issue
of these problems. How widespread is it? I spoke to a DA MP yesterday who said that she stopped short of voting twice. She tried to test the system. She stopped short of voting twice, went to the police, went to the IEC, but there seems to be a reluctance from the IEC to go to that specific voting station. So there are problems. Whether it will be enough to damage the integrity of the whole election, that's a different question. And let's hope the legal people in that white prefab building over there know what they're doing. And
that we don't have our elections taken to court. That's another issue that bugs me. But I want to move to the actual political parties and how they've done. Freedom Front Plus, the vindicate, if you want, of these elections, where out of nowhere, we knew that the DA was shedding members, but I don't even think the FF Plus expected the numbers, where it's now in some areas the fourth biggest party, the fifth biggest party. It's not the table, actually.
Tiri, just before we came on air, there was a big cheer on the floor just behind us. And that was when the Freedom Front Plus cleared the 300,000 vote mark. Remember that they only got 160 in the previous election for 0.9% support. They are headed, and our News 24's elections analyst Davy Scholes says that they are headed for north of 500,000 voters. Now that's more than they had in 1994. Now the time that we're in is a totally different era than 1994, which tells you what's happening amongst certain white voters. There's a swing away from the Democratic Alliance, a swing away from Musi Maimane, to a conservative party like the Freedom Front Plus. So it's interesting. Like there's been a huge swing to the EFF as well. Davi's crunching the numbers, and there's certain areas where the EFF really wallop the ANC. So there are shifts taking place. But the Freedom Front Plus, very interesting. You're right. I don't think they expected it. I didn't expect it either.
Neither did I. I'm going to quickly play you a clip of Dalim Pofu, who we spoke to yesterday, coming in, speaking about how the EFF was doing, how impressed they are, and concerns over voter turnout, and also the issues around the IEC. Here's a quick clip of that conversation. it's a very interesting election. So normally at this point in time, political parties are excited, but have some sort of an idea of what's happening. This time around, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of frustration on some level with regards to what's happening as far as the IEC and its handling of these particular elections are concerned. I just want to start with that point at the very beginning. What is the EFF's perspective of what's happening?
Well, we're not very pleased with the IEC, to be honest, because some of the glitches really could have been avoided. By now, they've been running these elections for a long time, but it looks like they have aging equipment, the staff was not properly trained, some of the procurement practices, for example, on the ink, are kind of questionable. But having said that, it's a huge operation. You are bound to have problems. So it's that magic word of materiality. So we hope, for example, this double voting thing that is not going to have a material effect on the outcome, in which case we can all move on and get to the issue of going to Parliament as soon as possible.
I've seen you holding an IEC book. I'm assuming as the advocate that you are, you kind of trying to refresh even your own mind about what's legally correct versus what's not. What recourse do political parties have? Let's say the audit, first of all, the audit could take up to several days. I know they've got 7 days to make a declaration for the time of voting. What recourse do political parties have? If the audits don't go your way, what happens then?
Well, we live in a constitutional democracy, and I think the risk of litigation will always be there. I mean, we are not particularly thinking that way, but with 48 parties, I'm sure one or two of them. And you can't blame them, because for the smaller parties in particular, this question of materiality might mean 200 votes, 300 votes.
Might be everything
might
to
make
them,
a big difference, yeah. For the bigger parties, they might only get worried when it gets to the hundreds of thousands. So, in our proportional representation system,
yes, that was
the difference between getting no seat and one seat might well be...
IEC from the party saying, they don't want to be too quick off the mark, and they're not necessarily of the belief that they need to take the IEC to court, but he did say there are 48 others, so you never know what happens. I just want to give you a quick rundown of the numbers as we speak. So the ANC is on 57.11%, the EFF on 10.08%, but here's the interesting one, with the DA is on 21.89%. Now, in the last elections of 2014, it got to up around 22%, Peter, if I remember.
Look, the fascinating thing about the DA, and I think that they should be very worried, is they were the only party that grew exponentially since 1994.
Yes.
They went from 12 to 16 to 22, only in the last couple of elections.
And now to hoping, as we speak, to go back to 22 so they can argue that they still remain stable. But that actually isn't the fact. If they score 22, when a party like EFF has grown so much, when a party like Freedom Front has grown so much, that cannot be a good thing. That is a threat to your position as the main opposition party in the country.
They must be seriously worried. There are some serious structural and ideological issues I think that party will need to address. If you cannot grow your party, the main opposition party, when the ANC is at their very weakest, when they're being beset by corruption scandals, state capture, internal civil war, internal fights, when will you be able to take advantage of it? They couldn't.
If the ANC gets stronger, there's no way. There's nothing else that they can do.
So James Self is milling around here trying to explain it, trying to spin it. Musi Maimane was here yesterday. I think they're in serious trouble. There are some serious debates going on in that party. And if the DA lost these 300,000, 350,000 odd white votes, and they replaced it with 700,000 black voters, then you could argue it was a win for them, because the party grew amongst the bigger part of the electorate. That's where you want to go. It was offset by those losses. That's fine, but they didn't. They just lost votes.
It's scary. There is a point where I will want to talk about Freedom Front Plus, but we'll do that in a few weeks' time, because there's something interesting about those white votes.
Lots of stats that we still have to get through.
Yes, we have a lot of work to do. But I want to go back to will he go, will he not go? The deal already so early confused about whether or not there was a leadership issue. For me, we were saying to the deal, and I think you must have been one of the people saying it as well, that the polls are reading very differently. Yours is scoring you really high and says you're going to excel, but everyone else says you're in danger, you should be wary. Why did the DA fail to listen? Why is it that there was a disconnect between what we're seeing and what they claim to see?
I think there's a whole politique that we can do around polling and how different it were. IR's polling, Mark Data's polling, Ipsos' polling, Davi's polling that his polling that we had. So it's difficult. There wasn't a clear pattern through all the polls. So that's the first thing. The second thing was some of these polls also said, and the DA were warned, you're going to lose Western Cape, you're going to lose Western Cape. In fact, they did better in the Western Cape than they did last time, so they were never in danger of losing it. But nationally, they did worse. Inside the DA, if we told them a couple of days ago with Darby's figures, you're going to get 23, they would have taken it. Because at one stage they expected they might get 18%. Because they've been through a torrid 18 months, the petition, the Lil affair, there's been a lot of issues. And that really impacted on them. But the fact of the matter is that in a period where the ANC were at their weakest, where the DA should have shown exponential growth, they could not. That must be a leadership issue because the tone is set from the top. The strategy, the plans, it comes from the top.
Hence
Questions
Musi
will be
is in
asked.
trouble. Hence Musi is in trouble. Speaking of Musi Maimane, he did drop by yesterday. You should have seen all the journalists running around after Musi Maimane just to get a word of what he makes, really, to get an understanding of what he makes of the numbers that we're seeing. And Musi did speak about Gauteng, you kept using the word comfortable, so he's comfortable.
Yes.
In spite of the early signs that actually you are in trouble and your mission to bring the ANC to under 50% is actually not going to happen. Take a listen to what he had to say to journalists yesterday.
No, look, what I think is important to note is the fact that when I set out as leader of the DA, I went out to say we want to build one South Africa for all, we want to build a party that works for all South Africans. And I think many of them have come through in a very complicated election if you look at how it's worked out. And we're comfortable. We're building a diverse organization. Black South Africans have come to vote for the DA, white South Africans have voted for the DA. So I'm quite content with where we are at the moment as a party. We've built a very strong foundation. And especially young voters have come out and the support for the DA has been very strong. So I'm quite comfortable with where it's at.
On the current trends, you're actually going to get fewer votes in Gauteng in this election than you did in 2014.
Look, I mean, the Gauteng election is still not finalized yet. I'm looking at the projections and see how we're going to go. We're comfortable with where we govern. We ran a very strong campaign here. So I'm looking forward to the final results when they come out. I'll be back here tomorrow as soon as I get more VDs coming in from Gauteng to get an understanding as to what happened in Joburg and all of that. But from our current indicators, one of the things that are always important for me to look out for is that when we went out to campaign to want to build one South Africa for all, I wanted to monitor to make sure that black South Africans, white South Africans, Indian South Africans, coloured South Africans came out to vote. And I think we've been able to achieve that. We're the only party that is representative of that in an election where in many ways there's been a contestation of different types of nationalism that have occurred. So we're very comfortable that we can offer that vision to all South Africans.
You have seen the smaller parties, they've made a call for the elections to be rerun. You support an audit, you've just said. You're not supporting a rerun at this stage?
Not at this stage. We've got to get an audit so that we know the extent. And the question about how material, the issues of ink not working properly, how when people came to cast their votes, actually they could vote twice. So let that audit take place. Because ultimately it's in the interest of every party, whether small or big, that you want to make sure that the elections were free and fair, which is crucial. So we'll be monitoring that particular situation. No, look, what I think is...
TD, I stood behind you during that press conference, or that impromptu press conference down there, and you asked the question of Musi Maimane of the lost votes, of the white voters as well. And I thought he was quite irritated when he answered you. I thought he was, you could see a guy under pressure. Because I thought when you asked the question, he turned around and he was irritated and he snapped and then they left.
I felt that part of the irritation, and I know my colleague Shante was irritated with me, is that I turned the entire press around because I was sitting at the back. And I was like, Musi! I think that's actually maybe part of the issue. But
he was under pressure and he was
irritated. He's under a lot of
irritated.
pressure. He's in trouble. Musi knows his future's in trouble, and so now what do you do to save face? You can't stay away from the electoral center. You must come show face. And we've been waiting for them to hit the 2 million mark. He was hovering just below the 2 million mark at the time. You show face, and we don't care that you're showing 2 million. We care that you're in trouble, and that's what we're all trying to tell you. And yes, I think the pressure was getting to him. I don't think it's easy to be in his position, to be the leader that takes, as you said, a party that's consistently been showing increase in numbers. And I remember, now that I think about it, I remember was it 2015 or 2014 when he became DA leader?
Yeah, 2015.
And people kept saying he doesn't have to do much. He's a black leader, he must just stand there and he'll just grow the party. And he's done the opposite. So, of course, I'll be irritated at every turn and every question will annoy me. Particularly because you failed to do the one thing of keeping the traditional voters of the DA with the party.
A couple of lessons out of this election, I think.
Sure.
One is that elections aren't won on Twitter. You know, it's a totally different world. It's not the real world. The second one is, if you don't have money to campaign, you're going to get nowhere. The third one is, if you don't have a good ground operation, and if you don't do it consistently, not just in a couple of weeks before the election, for 5 years, it's hard work, it's hard graft to grow a party. It didn't seem like the DA did that hard work for the last 5 years.
But you and I also know that over the past year and a half or so, they've been embroiled in their own issues. And I think somebody in the DA actually said this to me, and I couldn't help but agree. Musi last year was re-elected leader. That's when uncontested.
Yes, there was.
So you can cement. It's your party. It's your baby. You can move it in the direction that you need to move it in. I think part of the problem in the DA, and we've spoken about leadership, is Musi could never make up his mind. The claims that he's a puppet, unfortunately, he's played through. You know, where he failed to make hard decisions and to go with them. You know, I remember conversations around diversity and Musi consistently backing down because there's a different faction in the party that's stronger. You cannot be seen to be losing every argument within the party. The triple BEE arguments. You cannot be on the back foot and still call yourself a leader and think you can lead that party to victory. You can't do that.
And what's happened now is neither one of those factions were dominant, were in the ascendancy, and everything fell in between two chairs.
Yeah.
And this is what happened now. You know, the DA they were incoherent. It was unclear what they were doing. You know, a couple of months ago, there were already senior DA leaders saying, what are we planning for the election? You know, what are we targeting? We should go with the corruption thing. You know, that should be our target. They didn't really do it until the last couple of weeks. And by then it was too late.
Absolutely way too late. But you know, I'm also thinking about what the groundwork. And I must give the EFF. I mean, the EFF is on 10.8%, not quite what they'd hoped for or what they'd been polled for. But the interesting thing for me about the EFF is that the EFF didn't have money, didn't have a massive campaign. What they did have are ground forces. Julius Malema has very loyal followers. We've seen them at their best and we've seen them at their worst. If you think about what they do on social media. But they then worked for the party on the ground. Yeah. And you can see what it bears. It bears fruits.
Now that's the difference between the three big parties, I think. And tell me if you think I'm wrong. The ANC and the EFF have very loyal bases. People who have an emotional connection with the party. I don't think voters have an emotional connection with the DA. Whether it be, we've seen white voters certainly don't have an emotional connection with the DA, you know, and black voters certainly don't. But the ANC and the EFF there's a relationship with the voters, and that's the problem with the DA. You know, they built their support on the back of very hard work, groundwork, like you say, building networks under the leaderships of Zilla and Leon. You know, there was a progression. But that needs to continue, and it doesn't seem like it did.
But don't you think part of the problem with the progression is what happens between Helen Zilla and Musi Maimane? Where Helen, for the longest time, you're hearing the reports that she wouldn't let him lead as well. And I think because she groomed him, that he had no ability also to overcome. There's a lot around that dynamic, that relationship that I think hampered Musi Maimane. Yeah. But again, Musi, you were re-elected. That should have told you what to do. I remember the tweets around colonialism. He had to pretty much beg Helen Zilla to come and apologize. And then she went back and she did it again. So those were things that were indicating, again, to outsiders that there's no relationship here. And whilst I think about the loyalty between, and maybe there's another dimension, when you think about the ANC and the EFF, because the EFF is still seen as the children of the ANC, you know, it's an offshoot. The people who grew up with the ANC, particularly the black community, people who vote ANC rather grew up with the ANC, and maybe that's a relationship, you know. Maybe that's why there's a willingness to forgive the ANC, because let's be honest, the ANC does not deserve to win.
No.
After everything they've done, they don't deserve to be given another mandate. But these are people, I mean, I'm a child who grew up with the ANC in my head as a child, and you grow up to then try and make decisions away from it, but you struggle with a soft spot because you grew up with it, and the DA doesn't have that, based on its history. Yeah. But also then Musi comes in, and I think he's tried very hard to match his personal history and narrate that into the story of the DA. It hasn't worked. Well, at some point in 2016, it felt like it was working. But now in the long run, it clearly actually doesn't work.
Look, the DA needs to grow. It needs to grow amongst the black electorate. You know, there's no way that they're going to become a dominant party if they don't grow amongst the biggest demographic in the country. I mean, that's just simple mathematics and simple political logic. I can understand Musi Maimane's strategy to weave his history into that of the DA, because he wants to change the culture and the makeup and the DNA of the party. And the only way you can do it is if the leader's personality is infused in the party. That's how politics in this country, unfortunately, works.
It's true. We're still very much obsessed with personalities. I'm going to cut it there for just a little while. I'm going to take you to the floor. Let's catch up with what's happening down there. When we come back, we've got the Freedom Front Plus. I did say that these people, this party, it's a wonder kid. It's the most amazing performance. I didn't expect it. And we'll catch up with them when we come back from the floor. Yes, welcome back to News 24, our rolling coverage of the elections. These are the end days. We're waiting for the final results. My name is Tsidi Madia. I'm joining you again from the IEC's Rock Center, the Results Operations Center, the heartbeat, the nerve center, as far as these elections are concerned. Behind me, I don't know if you can see in the far distance, there's a big board there, and that's where the numbers are coming in. In fact, that's where we've been watching the Freedom Front Plus coming up and up and up. I think you've crossed the 300,000 mark this morning. I'm speaking now to its deputy chairperson in Gauteng, Philip van Staden. Philip, thank you so much for popping in.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Over the 300,000
Yes.
mark.
Yes.
Have you ever?
Look, we said we're going to grow, but we never expected this numbers to grow this high. We are now on the over 300,000 mark, and I think it's 77% of the ballots is now counted.
Yeah.
So we still have a long way to go. But Tshwane Metro is still outstanding. The Johannesburg Metro is still outstanding. Part of the East Rand and the West Rand is still outstanding. Parts of Free State IC is still outstanding, and parts of Northern Limpopo. Everywhere we've got support there. Numerous support. So our numbers can grow very high still today before the final countdown is ballot is counted. We're looking forward. We maybe touch and go maybe on the 400,000, but let's see, maybe if we do better, great, when we do better.
You've always been number 4 in Gauteng, from
Yes,
what I
yes.
understand. But what does the now increased margin mean for you and your role in the legislature?
Well, it will be indefinitely now. We already have 2 seats in the Gauteng legislature based on the 84,000 Gauteng already
Yes,
has.
yes.
We, as the numbers, if those areas come out and our numbers will grow, it can be that we get a 3rd seat in the Gauteng legislature and also a member to the National Council of Provinces from Gauteng. So then we can move in Gauteng from 4th to 3rd place. It's possible, but let's see what happens.
These elections, anything is possible. We've seen things we didn't expect to see.
Yes.
What did it take? What does it take to move something like the Freedom Front Plus to grow so quickly? We
Yes.
do know
Yeah.
that the DA share traditional voters.
Yeah, yeah.
That's something that we are well aware of, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that there's been an overspill. It goes beyond the DA supporters.
Yes.
It also goes to your traditional base. Why people, Afrikaner people, actually going out to voting. What was the message that you got them up to get out of their houses to go vote?
Well, you will be surprised if you go into the numbers actually and see how many other cultural groups campaign for us out of their own will for us before the election on the ground level. You will be astonished to hear that information. We've received news before the election of areas in Mamelodi, Shishigovi, Hammanskraal, Soweto, Alexandra, people who was campaigning for us out of their own.
From
Here in
townships?
Gauteng, in the townships. So we got that word from ground level from people with our connections in there. I myself at 3 public meetings in the south of Joburg in the Innerdale community, where they rock up in numerous numbers to come and listen to us. But people want change in this country. People in this country want a government who is responsible and responsiveness. They are tired and sick and tired of a government full of crime and corruption and all that nonsense we see now. And they see the Freedom Front Plus as the new party, the new guy in government who can basically put his foot down and provide this new stuff to the voters outside. And that's what the taxpayer wants. The taxpayer wants a responsible government, and they see that in the Freedom Front Plus.
Then what do you make of narratives such as one actually put forward by Musi Maimane, DA leader, yesterday? I said to Musi, but what do you make then of the fact that they say you've shared voters, and also the FF Plus? I remember Voter Vessel said this to me yesterday, that they're upset about how Musi Maimane has campaigned on race,
Yes.
and Bailey on race, and saying that, and rather Musi then said, yeah, but it's a nationalist party. You're having yet another form of nationalism in essence coming up to the fore. And again, obviously speaking about the race issue as far as the Freedom Front Plus is concerned, your position on that?
Look, we are a party for all South Africans. We're not a right-wing party. We're not a party for exclusive race. Our policy is for everyone. Anybody can become a member of a Freedom Front Plus. Our constitution of a party says this very clearly. If you want to be a member of us, you're more than welcome to come and join. And we have black members, we have brown members, we have Indian
You tell me
members,
about social
countrywide.
movement. You tell me
Yes,
about Alex
countrywide.
being people campaigning for you in the townships.
Yes.
I found that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Again, almost like the numbers that we're seeing.
Yes.
Obviously, this also gives you some sort of confidence and an idea of growing the numbers. I mean, from here onwards, the targets are local government elections.
Yes.
What have been your thoughts? I know it might be too soon, but you must start thinking about what to do next to grow the numbers.
Well, actually, we start Monday morning. We have a first meeting for the government elections coming forward in Gauteng. We already began to plan, but from this way forward, we must keep our numbers going up into the municipal elections. And we have to stop counting yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock because it was getting too much. Over all the country, we won 88 voting stations. 1 o'clock we stopped counting. It's too much.
It's too much.
But the previous election we won only 5.
I remember
in the country.
It's
So
it's phenomenal growth.
So
Voter
maybe
sentiment.
one ward is more existing in 7 voting stations. Some wards, some have 2, some have 3. But if this is the tendency to the municipal elections, don't be surprised if in Tshwane, especially, we can start winning wards in 2021. It's a possibility.
Anything is possible. That's the one thing I do see. Going back to your role in Gauteng, what are your big targets? You know, when you go back into the 6th administration, what is it that the FF Plus wants to see happening in Gauteng and will be pushing for when we return to the legislature?
Look, Gauteng is in a terrible state at this stage. I've been the member of the legislature for the past 5 years. I was the only member. Now I'm going to have some friends with me, actually. But now we have an effective opposition party against the ANC in the Gauteng legislature. We tackled the health issue in Gauteng. Other parties did well, yes, it's fine, but we did also. We tackled the education crisis in Gauteng. We tackled the infrastructure crisis in Gauteng. And it's all on record. In the media, everywhere I issued media statements onto these matters. The past 5 years, we, as Freedom Front Plus, was a one-man party with the legislature, but very effective opposition against the ANC in the legislature.
My parting shot to you now, though, has got to be about these township areas where you had so much support. Is there any thought about what your role could be in helping those areas? Because clearly they want your impact in those townships.
They want help. That's why they're campaigning campaign for us. What we do already in the housing committee and the cocktail committee in the legislature in the past term, we run the case of Alexandra and the housing issues around the black areas in Gauteng, and we were upfront with it every time. So we're hitting very hard on that issue, and we will continue doing that. The health issue also, the education issue also. It's not for one group, it's for everybody, and we will continue our work there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's the Freedom Front Plus. Phenomenal growth. Lots of work to be done. Lots of work towards 2021 when the municipal elections will come up. I'm going to take you back to a conversation I had yesterday with Patricia de Lille, the leader of New Party, 5-month-old Good. And then we'll chat about what she had to say to News 24 about these elections and the way forward for them. Auntie Pet, how important is the role of leadership? Because I don't believe that without you, Good would have actually gotten this far. This is a feat. Whether you agree with Good's policies or ideas or you don't understand them, you've got to give praise to the fact that this is a feat. Smaller parties, again, who started long before you, are still, some can't even make it to 10,000 votes. Is it a lot about the leadership that's guiding the ship, or is it about the people that you worked with and what they're doing on the ground?
Well, it is certainly an issue of two brands, the Patricia de Lille brand and the Good brand, but what we use it tactically to leverage the one of the other. And that's why we've been able to make lots of inroads, because it's also about, credibility, but people also want to see passion. And one of the things that inspired me every morning when I got out to go and campaign was to say we also need to deal with this toxic masculinity of just having all male leaders. Look at that board there. You can go from the top down, there's all of those ugly faces, and then you get to the first woman, and that's me. Now, we don't just want to see more women representation in Parliament. We don't just want to see more dresses in Parliament. We want to see women in leadership. And South Africa's political scenario is very, very male-dominated. So I'm going there. I'm not afraid of any one of them.
I don't think you are.
They will not be intimidating me. I will help them to shift the boys from the men, and then do it for women, because women can do it.
Tell me where we went wrong. We're looking at a 1994 ballot paper from the elections in 1994, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And when we looked at it, was amazed at the amount of females who featured on that ballot paper.
Yeah.
Where did we go wrong to a point where we pretty much have you and we have women forward? And that's kind of it. Where did we go wrong as a country as far as women representation and leadership as far as political parties are concerned?
But I think we need to look ourselves as women too.
Okay, sure.
You know, for you to get elected into a position, first of all, you must put yourself forward. And then you have to play by the rules of the game. In politics, you don't have rules for women or rules for men. They are just the rules. And you just need to get in there and play by those rules. And we need to encourage more women. That's why you need more role models. Encourage more women to come forward. And I think there are lots of young ones now that are ready to do it.
Hello, you're still with News 24, and we're still at the IEC's Results Operations Center. And back on my couch to the right is Associate Editor and Associate Editor of In-Depth News, and my colleague Peter.
I have to say, you're saying we're still here as if we would have left, you know.
You never know. By some miracle, maybe we would have left and gone home.
Joburg.
Or what if we came to them from a garden? You never know. Please. But we're still here at the IEC. I'm a little bit pumped. The president is on his way. So Ramaphosa, I believe, is running a little bit late, but he will be here. And it's going to get a bit chaotic. Every time the president stops by, it gets a bit chaotic. Musi Maimane himself said he'd be back here. But we just listened to Patricia de Lille of Good, speaking about women leadership and how, you know, we also need to work harder and how we need to fight the battle to have women representatives in politics. But also speaking about how great she's done. We saw yesterday they went right over the 50,000 mark. So they're back in Parliament. They're going to the National Assembly under a different name. She goes back under a different name, but she did it within 5 months, mind you.
So she certainly capitalized on her personality. CD, she's a strong personality. She's a popular leader in the Western Cape. She has a very long history in politics. She was with the PAC, then she formed her own party. She went to the DA, now she's got a second new party. I don't know why she's
chameleon extraordinaire.
Couldn't she have just resurrected the ID? You know, I'm sure the branding was still there. But the point is, I think she capitalized on she took a leaf out of Jacob Zuma's book. Actually, what was Jacob Zuma's big thing? The victim being under attack, you know, victims of this grouping, you know, that agenda. And it worked for her. So she's going back. You need 42,000 votes for a seat. She's probably going back to Parliament. But Tida, I have to question whether a one-man band like that can have an impact. Because like we know, politics in parliamentary politics isn't the main job isn't just making speeches on in the National Assembly and making the 8 o'clock news or the 7 o'clock news. It's actually working in committee, doing the hard yards, sitting on committee, interrogating reports, doing oversight, helping to light legislation. Does Patricia de Lille still have the stamina for that? Because we know she likes the attention. We know she's a figure that likes, you know, giving grand speeches. But working in committee isn't glamorous, and a speech doesn't always translate into good politics.
I'm in agreement with you. In fact, when you first started about the victim issue, I said to her, you know, some in the DA feel like you've kind of dented them. You know, they've been caught in battles with her, and she didn't leave alone. You know, nobody ever leaves a political party alone. They leave with people. And you know, she said to me, they made me a victim. Of course, she spoke about the victim issue, but also I'm of the mindset that women not even women, like political leaders like Patricia de Lille, fail to realize that there's another way to remain relevant. You know, when you speak about liking attention, that you don't have to actually go back to Parliament to remain relevant. I think Makosi Khoza didn't get it. She went back and forth, but she could have just found a foundation and taught democracy. It's not about democracy and about good governance. You remain relevant, and your voice remains a voice that we speak to as media when big issues are happening. There's ways for you to remain relevant outside of trying to participate in Parliament once again. So in that regard, I agree with you. I think our politicians aren't thinking outside the box. Aren't thinking outside the box at all. In fact, it's quite frustrating that they fail to do that quite often.
I think the DA could have handled it differently. You know, if she was a problem at the City of Cape Town, if she was becoming an issue for them in administration, or she's a difficult person to work with, as many people have said, take her to Parliament, you know, give her a job as the spokesperson or whatever, let her make those speeches, you know, give her the platform, you know, stroke her ego, then you take her out of that governance system in the City of Cape Town, take her to Parliament. You know, just tell her, you know, Patricia, you're a wonderful speaker. We want you here. This is the national platform. You know, there were ways and ways, I think, to move around the problem. They couldn't. You don't.
I don't agree. She's too much of a political player. Has done it for so long that she'd see it coming from a mile away. It should make it difficult for them no matter what they try to do, which is exactly what she did.
And she enjoyed being mayor, you know, everything that came with it.
Exactly.
The status.
So, no, you're not going to play Patricia de Lille and push her back to being a backbencher. That would never work. She'd see Musi coming from a mile away.
Am I naive, CD?
I think you are in this case.